What do George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Saint Valentine have in common? The month of February. The first two were born in that month, while the other prematurely died. But the month of February celebrates all three, and now you have a fourth reason to celebrate. Hello again, SA here. And when I'm not embarrassing myself on the internet, I'm also a published author, and I got a deal for you. Enjoy President's Day and Valentine's Day with my book series Glitch. It will be on sale for 25% off for the entire month. That way, when you're taking a load off on President's Day or getting sweets from your sweets, you can indulge in a story of a kidnapped teen model and a reluctant jewel thief who are on the run from the law. The links are down below in the description. And I'm not just some one-hit wonder. I got other books coming down the pike. So as long as nothing terrible happens to me.
And now...
Hey, Rocky! Watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat!
Again?
Nothing up my sleeve. Presto!
Wrong hat.
I take a 7.5.
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
You'll see those books too. Now let's get back to the video. Hello again, SA here. What is a plantation? Well, if you are familiar with American history, you probably have a pretty good idea. It's basically a farm where people grow produce, except the farm usually has indentured servitude or slavery. Yeah, that's right. And the funny thing is, plantations is not just an American thing. Indeed, anyone who's remembered with the colonial era in the 19th and 20th century knows that there was plantations all over the earth. In fact, the Frenchies, they had a lot of them in Southeast Asia, what was then known by the French as Indochine, which translates as Indochina in English. Yeah, they had banana plantations and plantations growing mangoes and stuff like that. And English, yeah, back during the bad old days of the British East India Company, they had plantations in India, growing tea. And the Dutch East India Company, they had plantations all over Indonesia, growing spices like nutmeg and saffron. And of course, South America, oh, they had a lot of plantations down there. In fact, I think they still have plantations down there, and indentured servitude that people don't want to talk about, particularly in places like Brazil. And then, but anyway, this is not about the old school definition of plantations. This video is about political plantations. And what's a political plantation? Well, I'm going to show you a little video, and I'm going to let you know right now this video is from some TikToker who's clearly a leftist, and they clearly, let's just say, had decided they no longer want to be a part of the DNC's plantation. Are you ready? Here we go.
Hi, my name is Kyle. I have been a registered Democrat for the last 22 years. I have voted in every election, up and down from the state to local level, that I could vote in. I campaigned for John Kerry and Barack Obama. This message is for the Democrats. I fucking hate you. I hate the fact that you've bamboozled us for so many years, touting progressive policies, and giving us nothing. I hate the fact that there are so many broken campaign promises. I hate the fact that you've weaponized our rights to scare us into voting for you. I hate the fact that you failed on protecting reproductive rights. I hate the fact that you support economic policies that actually produce the conditions that make fascism viable. and you don't admit that. I hate the fact that you're classist and not actually egalitarian. I hate the fact that you don't support Medicare for all, housing for all, affordable to free secondary education. I hate the fact that you tout small incremental changes to the fabric of our society as a resounding success when people are still economically struggling and hungry. I hate the fact that you won't call a genocide a genocide. I hate you for supporting policies that produce more bombs and not food. I hate you for supporting the status quo and not for doing the right things to make everyone's life better. I hate the fact that you're not mature enough to receive criticism. And I hate the fact that you criticize the rest of us for being idealistic and wanting better for everyone. And I hate you for blaming your failings on procedural precedent, a majority of which is nothing more than rules that are holdovers from the Reconstruction era and Jim Crow. I hate you. And you lost my vote, and you lost many people's vote, and that's your fucking fault.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess you quite can hear from that man's voice that he is obviously disappointed with the DNC. And you know what? He should. Because anyone who knows the history of DNC knows they seem to have always been on the wrong side of every major argument that's ever occurred in this country since its inception. And when I mean its inception, I mean the inception of the Democratic Party. For example, slavery itself, the DNC, they were the baddies. They supported slavery. They supported the Confederacy. And indeed, when the Confederacy lost, they supported the Ku Klux Klan. They supported Jim Crow. And then in the 1950s, when they had Brown versus Board of Education, guess who was supporting the Board of Education? That's right, the local DNC. And then, of course, some of you saying that, oh, but the DNC claims that after the Civil Rights Movement, the party shift. Did they? Really? A long time ago, Kevin Spacey famously said that the biggest trick the devil ever pulled was to make the world believe he didn't exist. Well, guess what? The second biggest trick that was ever pulled was the DNC to make people think that the parties switched, when in fact, they hadn't. Don't believe me? Ask Joe Biden. Because when Joe Biden was first entered the Senate, back during the Nixon era, he palled around with people like Strom Thurmond. And you say, Strom Thurmond, who's he? Ever heard the phrase Dixiecrat? Look it up. Dixiecrats were the hard segregationist faction inside the DNC that formed sometime in the 1920s, 1930s. And those people were still active in the 1970s, a good decade after the Civil Rights Movement. And these people try to say that the parties had changed. Only thing that changed was DNC's tactics. They clearly felt they lost the argument on the Civil Rights Movement, so they basically, played as though that they embraced it when they clearly hadn't. And that's why when the time Reagan rolled around, they created a new narrative that all the racists had moved to the Republican Party. And I will concede part of that story is true. Because anyone who remembers Nixon remembers the Nixon's Southern strategy in 1968. And what was that strategy? To get disaffected Democrats who basically lost the argument on the Civil Rights Movement to vote for him. Not that he was going to do anything about it, but it worked. And a whole bunch of people who otherwise would have voted Democrat voted Republican. And guess what? Jump forward 50 plus years later, what was then a DNC stronghold, the South the Old South, is now an RNC stronghold. And before you say, oh, because all those leftover segregationists are still voting Republican, no. All those people are long dead. Because when you go back and look at the 1968 election, the average age of those Dixiecrats and some of those other leftovers from the segregation period, most of those people were middle-aged. Therefore, how long do you think they lived after the Nixon era? Into the 80s, perhaps? So then who's voting down there now? A whole new crop of people. People who are not necessarily segregationists, but people who clearly left the Democratic plantation. And then you say, well, where's the new Democratic plantation? The big cities, where basically where most black folks moved to when they left the South after, as Jim Crow was crumbling. Indeed, when I was a little boy, my mother, who was a farm girl from Arkansas, she told me about how all of her brothers were leaving Arkansas and were going to places like Los Angeles, Detroit, Chicago. And this was back in the 1940s. And indeed, she and her younger sisters and her parents were the last ones to leave Arkansas. They came to California. And that was back around the end of the 1940s. But all her older brothers, they long left. And therefore, when you apply that one story to what was going on throughout the South, a whole bunch of brown people left the South and moved all to these big cities, from sea to shining sea. Now jump forward to the 1970s, when you had a lot of degradation, crime, and just generally a depressed economy. And the DNC found a way in through the back door. They set up machines in these places, such as New York, such as New Jersey, such as Chicago, and of course Los Angeles, and San Francisco too. Because anyone who's my age probably remembers that Los Angeles was not a DNC stronghold. It was mostly Republicans. Indeed, the whole state was basically Republican. But then, over time, the culture changed in California. Yeah, it changed. Why? A variety of factors. First of all, you had people moving in who weren't, for the most part, right-wing. They were liberal. They were leftists. I mean, good grief. Anyone who remembers Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco in 1967, that's just one good example. And even after the Summer of Love, that Summer of Love ended, a lot of those hippies stayed. I mean, Tom Hayden, remember him? Yeah. Or how about Jerry Brown? Yeah, he's another one. Yeah. All these lefties and liberals stayed in California, and slowly over time they became elected officials, and they slowly started to change the culture. And you got to remember, Hollywood was here in California too, and thanks to Hollywood control over culture when it comes to movies and television, it also helped change the culture. It made things that people didn't even believe was feasible in the 1960s, 70s more palatable, such as gay rights, for example. I mean, for example, one of the first gay elected officials was Harvey Milk. And Harvey Milk, an openly gay man who got elected in San Francisco, was a Democrat. And that's just one of many examples in how the Democrats basically use what we now call identity politics to gain a toehold on political power in the United States. And because of examples like that, slowly but surely they created a new plantation in these big cities, in New York, in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, in Chicago. And that's why now, here in the 2020s, when you go to these cities, they're all Democrat. And we're not just talking about the elected official, we're talking about the people underneath them. the damn bureaucracy. They're all Democrats. And yet, as you saw from that guy in his little TikTok video, the Democrats, all they care about is three things: me, myself, and I. They don't care about you, they don't care about me, they don't care about the fool hiding behind the tree. All they care about is themselves. And these leftists, remember that guy in that TikTok video, he's a leftist. He's clearly disappointed that the DNC leadership is not a leftist like him too. And you know why? Because they don't care about you. All they care about is your vote. But guess what? Brown people, hey, they've gotten wise. And fewer brown people are voting Democrat. And the Democrats are just losing their minds. And you know what basically helped break the back of this? It was identity politics. And you say, really? How? Because brown people in the United States, especially those around my age, we've been around the block a few times. We know the ins and outs of identity politics. Indeed, a lot of black folks got elected thanks to identity politics. Remember Mayor Bradley back in the 70s? Yeah. Because when he was running against Sam Yorty back, I think it was 1972, Sam Yorty tried to use identity politics against Bradley, and it boomeranged, backfired, and it caused more people to vote for Bradley than against him. And indeed, during that time, there was a coalition made up primarily of white liberals and brown people. And Bradley got in there, and Bradley was mayor for 20 years. But then, unfortunately, the DNC went too far. Because one thing to use identity politics to get your people in office, it's another thing to use it to keep them there. And anyone who remembers when Joe Biden tried to run for president back in 2008 remembers when he stupidly was telling a bunch of brown people at some meet and greet that you had to vote a Democrat because you vote Republican. Remember, this was John McCain, okay? Republicans will put you back in chains. Really? Rubbish. Because Republicans back then, all they cared about was going off to the Middle East and blowing up Arabs. And worried about, and the RNC elites, all they cared about was their lobbyist money and their tea time at the Riviera Country Club. That's all they cared about. They didn't give a shit about identity politics. They didn't play with it. And that's what more and more wealthy black folks, like Oprah Winfrey, for example, learned that Democrats can get you in the door, but Republicans will get you rich. And indeed, that was one of the main weaknesses of the Democratic Party's in identity politics. Because as they kowtowed to people in the inner city, they soon found that those people were generally poor. But you can give them all kinds of state benefits, but that's not going to get them rich. It's just going to keep them sucking at the proverbial government tit, as they say. Republicans, on their hands, basically are like Reagan, you know. They don't care about identity politics. They just want people to be healthy and wealthy. And that's why they tend to go out of their way to end all kinds of regulations and lower taxes so people who are in business can make money and make lots of money. And you saw that with Reagan. You saw that with George Bush. You saw that with Bush Jr. And, wait for it, you ready? You saw that with Trump. And indeed, when the Democrats tried to use the same old, the Republicans or the parties chain, they want to put black people back in chains, it didn't work with Trump. And brown people such as me saw it. Because anyone who was familiar with Trump back during his real estate days showed that he was constantly kowtowing to brown people in New York City. Because Trump wasn't a Republican. He was a Democrat. In fact, in the spectrum, Trump was what you call what they euphemistically refer to as a blue dog Democrat, someone who's basically a center right. Like, for example, damn, what's that fella? Yeah, the guy from West Virginia, senator, I think Mnuchin, I think his name is. Yeah, in fact, he's probably one of the last blue dog Democrats in the damn Senate. And but then Trump, he had changed his tune. Indeed, he initially thought about running for political office, but in the Ross Perot, remember him, his Reform Party. But then he changed his mind. Why? He had his reasons. But then Trump, who is not entirely a fool, despite what you might see on the old reruns of The Apprentice, he saw an opening in the Republican Party because they lost two elections in a row. First with John McCain in '08 and then with Romney in 2012. And Romney, in theory, could have won because Romney was about as milquetoast as you can be. I mean, the guy was totally non-controversial. Problem is, he was one of those old school Republicans, country club Republicans, and it showed. And Barack Obama just sit there with his plastic mouth and say, "Vote for me because this guy, all he cares about is rich people," which was true. And sure enough, people voted for Barack Obama. So there you go. But anyway, when Trump came along, he saw an opportunity because unlike Romney, while Trump is a rich guy, most people refer to Trump euphemistically as a blue-collar billionaire. And what does that mean? It means that he may be a rich guy, but he's a rich guy who earned his money as opposed to simply inheriting it. Because if you look at Mitt Romney, for example, Mitt Romney, for the most part, inherited his wealth. I mean, he's a hedge fund guy. I mean, he's never really built his wealth at all. He basically had a bunch of accountants build his wealth for him. Trump, on the other hand, yeah, he did initially get some money from his daddy, but compared to how much he has now, it was almost like seed money. And everything Trump had, he built on his own. And yeah, he did have some losses, but hey, everyone doesn't score 1,000 at baseball. And all of a sudden, the Democrats didn't understand. First, they tried to use identity politics against Trump. That didn't work. It didn't work. It didn't take. It was like giving someone a bad kidney. It was rejected. And therefore, they used bad propaganda trying to claim he worked for the Russians. And that didn't work either. People who were smart could see that he had nothing to do with the Russians. And then, of course, it came out that that whole Russia collusion mess was bullshit made by Hillary Clinton. So there you go. So yeah, you could say that the way the DNC was behaving towards Trump exposed the fallacy of identity politics. The Democrats, if they were comfortable with identity politics working, they would just kept on doing it. But the fact that even they knew during the Trump era that it was failing and that they were trying to use propaganda to convince people to continue to vote for them. Remember, during 2020, what did Joe Biden tell that radio guy? What did he say? He said, "If you don't vote for me, you're not black." Remember that? That was their attitude, especially old farts like Biden. They had taken the black vote for granted for so long that they didn't know what they would do if they lost it. And guess what? They're losing it now because more and more black folks are saying we're done with the Democratic Party. We're finished with them. They don't care about us. All they care about is themselves, which is true. And indeed, I remember there was this film called Krampus. It was a sci-fi. It It was a horror film based on an ancient legend of the Krampus that shows up on. Basically, it's the flip coin of Santa Claus. You have Santa Claus, which brings gifts. You have Krampus, which brings pain and misery on Christmas. But anyway, in that film, there was a scene with Randy Quaid, and he was visiting his relatives for the holidays. And when they showed up at their relative's house, and they were living in a big old mansion, like something out of Home Alone, and the first thing out of his mouth, you can look up the film. I remember the scene. I thought it was funny. Remember, this was like 2010, 2012. They show up at their rich relative's mansion, and the first thing out of Randy Quaid's mouth was, "Wow, these people must be Democrats." He said that on camera. And then you wonder, why would he say something like that? Because even then, during Obama's period, people in Hollywood, that was a Hollywood film, knew that that when it came to the Democrats' constituency, it was changing then. And you say, changing how? Well, look at Silicon Valley. Google, Apple, Amazon. Who do you think works for those people? People who vote Democrat. And then you say, why? Because they're lefties. These people tend to be tech giants. They tend to be multimillionaires and billionaires, but they also tend to vote Democrat because they're leftists and liberals. And wait for it. You ready? Elon Musk. He's a lefty too. Until recently. Indeed, Elon Musk admitted he voted for Barack Obama twice. And he also voted for Hillary Clinton. But he didn't vote for Joe Biden. Why? Because during the Trump era, Elon, who is not a stupid guy, he could see through the propaganda. He could see that the DNC didn't care about brown people or gays or Hispanics or anybody like that. Because just like back during the bad old days of the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement, the Democrats were on the wrong side of history again. They were embracing identity politics, or I should say extreme identity politics, or in third wave feminism, remember that stuff, and postmodernism, that garbage, and cultural Marxism, that mess. And they were doing it at the disenfranchisement of their so-called constituency, or I should say the Obama legacy, where Obama brought together white liberals and all these damn various, disaffected brown people and other racial minorities. But cultural Marxism, if you read it in the textbook, its main tenet is to get these various groups to fight each other. And all during Obama, and especially during Trump, even though the news media didn't cover it, the cultural Marxists, who tend to be white liberals, or I should say white leftists, were basically had declared war on everybody. On brown people, on other whites. I mean, ever heard of racial affinity groups? Yeah. You had that shit happening all over the place, and not just in universities. Indeed, DEI, that diversity, equity, and inclusion bullshit, which is just basically racism, is basically Jim Crow under a different name. The DNC embraced that garbage. And unfortunately, brown people could see it. Indeed, here in California, during the Trump era, these leftists actually had petitions signed, and they were trying to overturn the California Constitution that would allow racial discrimination. It didn't succeed, only because enough people saw through it. It was basically DEI on a statewide scale. And people said, no, we want no part of this. And the fact that the DNC leadership in California supported that initiative basically was their beginning of the end of them. And that's why right now, when you look at these various polls, more and more people who were part of the old Obama coalition basically want no part of the DNC anymore. They don't want nothing to do with them because these people ended up on the wrong side of the argument. They embraced identity politics for too long. They basically took for granted brown people and even white liberals, just like the TikTok video I showed. They took them for granted. Because when you look at the DNC leadership, who do you have? Pelosi, Schumer, Shifty Shift. And all these people care about is me, myself, and I, and my lobbyist money. That's all they care about. And they occasionally go to Hollywood with their hat in their hand and get money from them. Oh, they definitely go to Silicon Valley. I mean, remember that article in Time magazine about the shadow campaign to save the election? Yeah, who bankrolled that? It was Zuckerberg, or Zuckerborg if you really don't like the guy. Yeah, gave the DNC nearly $500 million to rig that election. Yeah, that's right, rigged. But guess what? I don't think Zuckerberg's going to write them another check for $500 million to rig the 2024 election. No, I think, what's the cliche? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Yeah, he gave the DNC $500 million and he got burned for it. They took their money, they got Joe Biden in the White House, and they basically said to Zuckerberg, fuck you very much. So, nah. They better not show up at his doorstep with their hat in their hand. He'll just shut the door in their face. So what's going to happen with the DNC now? Well, if fair is fair, they'll end up like the Whigs or the Federalists, i.e. a defunct political party. Which is a good thing. Because when you look at American politics, no political party lasts forever. Indeed, the RNC's only been around since Lincoln. Yeah, look it up. The RNC didn't exist before Lincoln became president. And the Democratic Party, oh my God, they've been around since the 1820s. So there you go. Obviously, the Democratic Party has lived past its due date. And it probably needs to close shop and move on and allow some other new party to take their place. What kind of party? I don't know. Maybe old Ross Perot's Reform Party can reconstitute itself. And then, of course, you have the Libertarian Party. I mean, they have the Mises Caucus up there in Vermont. Yeah. I mean, they seem to be doing well. Maybe they can become a nationwide party for once and actually try to get people to vote for them based on their libertarian standards. Yeah. Perhaps. Because the DNC, more and more people are leaving their plantation. And that's a good thing. And it's a long time coming. Yeah, well, that's all I have to say about the DNC and how they basically shit the bed again. And that's my opinion.